Hello, greetings. This is Stephen Hawley Martin. Welcome to The Truth About Life. Today we're going to be speaking with Lynn McTaggart, an internationally recognized spokeswoman on the science of spirituality.
She's the award-winning author of 5 books, including The Field, which has been published in 14 languages and inspired the wildly successful movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? Well, Lynn, in a little while I want to talk to you about the experiment that you've been running, but first, what is the field?
The field is the quantum energy field that unites all of us in its invisible web. And very simply, it's the field that is created by the little energy dance that goes on between subatomic particles. All subatomic particles are more like, instead of being little billiard balls, they're more like little vibrating packets of energy. And they send energy back and forth like a little bit like a game of tennis. And in that tiny exchange and that very, very rapid exchange, a little virtual particle is created. And that virtual particle itself is energy. Now, when you have that exchange between one subatomic particle, it's only about a half a watt's worth of energy, not much. But when you multiply that by all the subatomic particles in all the things in all the world, you come up with this unfathomable amount of energy in empty space, like some supercharged backdrop. And that energy in empty space is also what unites us.
Is it then the field that existed before anything existed that Einstein was trying to figure out a formula for?
Well, I guess that probably is it. It's been referred to as many things. Many, many cultures talk about a unifying energy field. A lot of people have intuitively understood this for many centuries, and it's only now with science that we're able to quantify this and actually describe it with equations.
Yes, I guess mystics have always said all is one. Is that
exactly? Well, that's it, and this is it. This is what this is likely to be that, and now we have a scientific explanation for it.
Well, what are some of the implications? Isn't one of the implications that we all once were the field, and that we came out of it?
The field, not once were. We are the field now, and that we will be the field after we die. That energy doesn't die, and it's having this kind of invisible web on a subatomic level is very interesting for many things. Every way that we describe ourselves, every way that we've organized ourselves as human beings, as living things, is based on a view of ourselves given to us by science in more than 300 years ago. That idea, based on the principles of Isaac Newton, describes a very well-behaved universe operating according to fixed laws in time and space. It also describes separate objects that are finalized constructions as they are, and they're not mutable and malleable, and they don't influence each other unless one does something physical to something else. So we usually think of influence as being, you have to freeze something, burn it, drop it, kick it, or, in some way do something physical to it. And so that's been our understanding of us, all as separate entities. And because of that, we have, in a sense, set up our world idealizing separateness and individuality and competition. And so the real implication of understanding that we're all one is that we have to act as a unity. We have to act together in cooperation. And that informs us in a very, very different way, in the way that we would set up our businesses and our educational models and our societies. So there's just enormous implications here for the idea of being all connected.
Right. I'm speaking with Lynn McTaggart, the author of The Field, about the field and the implications of it. Lynn, are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake's theories?
I'm not only familiar with him, I know Rupert very, very well.
He says that we each are our own field, a morphogenetic field, which I assume contains all our memories, both of our past lives, if you will, as well as that of the rest of humanity, and things like shape. And this somehow interacts with DNA to make, when we become physical through birth, to form our bodies and to form ourselves. Is that correct? Have I got that?
Yes. And it's this idea of a collective memory that exists in the field. There's a lot of interesting data that supports that now. Easiest one is to look at is the data on IQ. The average IQ used to be much lower than it is now, and that seems to be building over time. Just like, it used to be an 8-minute mile, and now it's a 4-minute mile. We're getting faster as time goes on, and so there's a collective learning field that seems to be involved here. And many of the descriptions of the field are in a sense, a tape recorder. It's a if you think of wave information, waves encode information, and they have an infinite capacity to encode infinite amount of information. And so if this is the case, the field is getting smarter as we live on, and it's collecting more and more information that resonates through all space and time.
So metaphysicians, for example, or mystics or whatever would call it the Akashic records, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah. As I say, many native cultures, many ancient cultures, virtually all of them but the West, have understood intuitively about the idea of a universal, unifying energy field. And it's only we in the West who have thought of ourselves as being separate. And many people have called it many things, the unifying, chi, the Akashic field, all those sort of things.
So
and
everything that
all mean more or less the same thing.
Right. Everything that's ever happened, every thought that's ever been thought, is recorded, just as though I'm recording this interview that we're taking. It's recorded on the field or in the field as part of the field.
Exactly.
What about Cleve Baxter? I noticed that you mentioned him in one of your books. I read the Intention Experiment. Tell us what his experiments show.
Well, Cleve Baxter is one of the world's greatest and most advanced lie detector experts. And this is back 40-something years ago when Baxter was a young man, and he was sitting in his office one night a little bored, and he thought to himself, well, I wonder what would happen if I took my polygraph equipment and attached it to a plant. And at that time, polygraph equipment was very simple. It was just electrodes that you would attach to your fingers, and they would in turn be attached to a readout mechanism that would have a pen that would draw a tiny wiggle if you were telling the truth, and it would become a giant wiggle if you started to lie, because that would be evidence of autonomic nervous system upset. You'd be getting stressed in some way. So he wanted to see if a plant registers anything when it was watered. So he attached the plant. It was a Dracena plant, a cane plant, and he poured some water in it, and the plant acted as though it were bored. And so he thought, if it was human, this would have been boredom. So he thought, water again. So he thought to himself, Baxter thought to himself, well, let's see, maybe I should do something drastic here. So he thought, I think I'll burn its leaf. And exactly at that moment when he just had the thought, the plant registered huge alarm.
Oh my, so the plant picked up on his thoughts.
What is that? And he went and he got the match and he kept lighting it, and the plant was registering alarm, was really freaking out. And he then put the matches down, stopped any thought of doing so, and the plant calmed down. And so Baxter then thought to himself, my goodness, that plant has read my thoughts. And from then on, he began carrying out a systematic batch of experiments to test what he called primary perception, the idea that living things are attuned with their environment. And he found that the plants in his office would register alarm if some little living thing in the environment died. For instance, he even set up an automated system where it would pour brine shrimp into boiling water, and the plants would all be hooked up to his polygraph equipment, and the moment the shrimp hit the water and went to their death, the plants would register this alarm again. So it was almost like, I mean, Baxter was a great fan of Star Wars, and he used to, as he used to describe it, it was like, as Yoda said, I feel a disturbance in the Force. So, you know, Baxter then went on to test yogurt and eggs and bacteria, all sorts of things like that. And he was ridiculed for his work, because this is back in the 60s and 70s. He even got a... Esquire magazine gave him a dubious achievement award, you know, and the headline said, you know, scientist says yogurt talks to itself. And he was, you know, he was really ridiculed. But it took now up until the present for other scientists to find that Baxter was right, because there's a load of new evidence from people like Fritz Albert Popp and many other scientists like that, demonstrating that we are sending and receiving a tiny current of light all the time, all living things. And moreover, the living things in your environment are picking up this information and replying to it.
That's fantastic. I'm speaking with Lynn McTaggart, and she is the author of the best-selling book, The Field, and also The Intention Experiment. Well, this really has all kinds of implications for me when you think about the law of attraction, for example, that's become so popular in the last year because of the popularity of the movie The Secret. Are we sending out things, thoughts, I guess, into the field that are coming back to us and creating our reality? Is that something we can take? Can we take that kind of a leap?
Well, I think we can take a leap saying that thoughts are definitely energy, and they're definitely a thing. There have been many studies demonstrating that with healers, when they send out healing energy, this kind of directed intention, there's an enormous increase in energy of every variety. There's an electrical energy increase. There is an increase of magnetic energy. There's an increase in light. So all these kinds of things are going on. So there is we can say that a thought is not only a thing, but a thing that seems to affect other things. So it seems that this energy is going out there and affecting things. Now, there's certain, as to whether or not this can translate into a manifestation of a car or whatever, or changing your work, that's what I'm experimenting with. I mean, the evidence shows we certainly can change physical things out there, and we can do this as well, and that we can affect certain events, even in the past. So how far we can go is really the subject of my book, and the book is really open-ended because I'm involving readers in ongoing experiments testing just this thing.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I've read your book, The Intention Experiment, and I understand from reading it that 2007 was a year when you were going to conduct a lot of experiments and ask people to come online and participate and so forth. What have been the results of all that?
Well, we've had some amazing results. I mean, we started with the ground floor. When I first thought about this, I wanted to have experiments that would be philanthropic targets. So they wouldn't be about winning the lottery. They'd be about fixing or helping to fix the catalog of suffering on the planet and many of the ecological worries and crises we now face. So when I first approached scientists about this, I described that what we would do is they would have certain targets in their laboratories or be measuring certain targets, and I would invite my readers to come on my website and participate, and they would send their thoughts to that target. And that's how it was to work. And I thought about, helping cancer victims and all sorts of things. And when I first approached Dr. Gary Schwartz, who very generously offered to be the first scientist with me on these, he said, great, let's start with a leaf. And I thought, what? A leaf? I'm not going to be able to really excite the hearts and minds of people with this. But he convinced me that if you're trying to do something that's never been done before in science, you have to start with baby steps. So we started with a leaf, and we used a group. We used a group of people at one of my conferences in London. There were 400 some people there. We thought, this is our first experiment. Let's work with these people. So we had not only a leaf, but a control leaf. So we had one that would be scent intention and the other one not. The scientists wouldn't know which was which. And Dr. Schwartz has very, very sophisticated CCD cameras that not only can count this living light coming out of living things, but also photograph it. And so we decided to send intention to one of the leaves. Schwartz and his team did not know which one, and they then did the photographs and the calculations for both leaves. And our intention was to increase the light, make it glow and glow. And the photographs afterward are just astonishing. The one sent intention is much, much lighter than usual. It truly is glowing, according to these photos. And the one not sent intention is darker. So it almost had a neglect effect. So we tried this. We then tried it on the internet with thousands of people using seeds, and that again was successful. We showed a real difference in the two.
Seeds? What did you want them to grow?
Seeds. And we just asked them to glow too.
Oh, I see.
And then the third one, again, we did with some healers, reconnective healers, and again, we had a significant effect. So then we wanted to move on to something else, something with more practical application. So we decided to send intention to make seeds grow faster. Because we thought, if we can do this, we can speed up the production of food. So we did this again over the internet. We did it with a group in Australia. I did it with a group in Rhinebeck, always sending intention to seeds in Arizona. And this time we had not just one control batch of seeds, but 3. And then we did it with a bunch of healers in South Carolina, experienced healers. And in every instance, we had a significant effect. The seeds sent intention grew significantly. They sprouted significantly earlier and grew significantly higher than the seeds not sent intention.
That's amazing. Now, what are you going to do with these? Have you published these experiments yet?
We're going to be publishing these experiments in scientific journals. They're being prepared now for publication. And we also found a lot of things from them. I mean, this is just early days, but we found that the seeds sent intention by healers grew twice as large.
Twice as large. Amazing.
Twice as large. So that would suggest that experience matters. And we found that also we've also changed the cluster structure of water. We've tried that most recently. We've done 2 experiments like that. So now what we're doing now is we see that with so many different kinds of systems, intention sent to that system changes it some way, changes its physical reality. And so now we want to try to use it in even more appropriate uses. So we're going to try one of our plans for 2008. We're working with one of the world's experts on water, Dr. Rustam Roy from Arizona State University. He's got one of the most sophisticated water labs in the world. And we're going to try to mutate bacteria, sending intention to polluted water. And so if you can bacteria mutate very easily. If we can nudge them over to mutate in a certain way, we can turn polluted water into drinkable water.
That's amazing. I'm speaking with Lynn McTaggart, and she's the author of The Field and the Intention Experiment. And we're talking about the intention experiments that she's been carrying out over the last year or so, and with some amazing, amazing results. Well, my experience has been that most scientists are so very skeptical about all of this, even though the implications of quantum physics have been around for a long time. I mean, Einstein wrote about them almost 100 years ago. It was 100 years ago, I guess. And yet they seem to want to poo-poo all this. Do you think that's changing, though? Do you pick up on that most scientists are starting to realize that maybe thoughts don't always just stay inside our brain, that they really are everywhere at once, as Cleve Baxter showed? Or do you see it changing, Lynn?
Well, I see in some quarters. I mean, I was very interested in researching for the intention experiment because, ordinary scientists, quantum physicists, say at the University of Chicago, came up with evidence that I mentioned in the book showing that matter has big non-local connections. That means invisible, instantaneous effect on each other, that atoms of just ordinary particles have been shown to do that. They found that even the big building blocks of matter are not a finalized anything yet, a property that was supposed to be only true with subatomic reality. Now we know that in the big sticks and stones world that we live in, the same things apply. So scientists are realizing that those kinds of ideas that we always held as sacred are now up for grabs. And the same thing with things like time. We're now realizing we've got very, very robust evidence showing that future conditions affect the present, and that in fact there have been some very good studies of retro-intention, the idea that you can go and back and change something that supposedly has already occurred. So our ideas about time have to change. It's much more mutable than we thought it was. It's not this arrow that just goes forward relentlessly as we always thought. And so I think scientists are understanding that reality is a lot weirder than we thought it was. And from that, they'll start embracing the idea that thoughts are just one other kind of energy, that the human body is just pure energy, and that thoughts are one other aspect of that energy that can reach out there and affect the physical world.
And energy can't be destroyed. It's always exists then.
Exactly. That's the other thing, too, that we don't, and there's more and more evidence demonstrating that consciousness doesn't die. Very good evidence on near-death experiences that really, and on coma victims, when patients are supposed to not have consciousness, that they are aware of their surroundings at a very, very fundamental level and know everything that's going on. So if this is the case, then our idea of, mind equals brain equals computer is completely wrong. So all these sorts of things are giving the most open-minded scientists pause, and hopefully our intention experiments will offer them more proof. That's the whole idea behind them, is to really, there have been many demonstrations and a lot of people playing around with group meditation, etc. But I wanted to provide real rigorous scientific conditions for seeing how far we can take this.
That's fantastic. I've been speaking with Lynn McTaggart, the author of The Field, as well as The Intention Experiment. This has been just a fascinating interview.
Thanks so much for spending time with us today. If our viewers enjoyed this as much as I did, I hope they'll visit my YouTube channel. There are many more fascinating interviews there. Talk with you next time.